Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Look how bright. You're a front row kid. Definitely a front row kid. On behalf of Camilla and myself, welcome to Rhodes House. It's really wonderful to have you all here. This 40th anniversary of Rhodes Women weekend promises to be, I think, a wonderful weekend of celebration, exploration, learning, reconnection, and all of those kind of verbs. We have 150 women here this weekend, including 4 members of the very first class of 1977. And all decades of Rhodes Women are represented. And it was interesting to note there are 16 Rhodes countries represented. And looking at the statistics, the proportion of women from each of our constituencies that are here mirrors the percentages from those constituencies. So people came back in about the proportions that they originally came up, which is kind of cool. We have 5,000 people in the Rhodes community today, 27% of which are women. And since for many of the years, of course, there were no women admitted, that's a number that will climb. I do note that the first class was 36% women, and the most recent class was 49%. And if you look at the last 5 years, we've hovered between sort of 49 and 51. So that is also, interestingly, without any intervention. We do our selection across now about 70 committees worldwide over just a couple of weekends, and we never, we tell people to pick the best people on the day, and that's what's happening. I was talking to Karen Stevenson earlier about whether we would begin to see what we've seen in U.S. universities, which is it shift over to be a majority of women, and I think there's every reason to expect that. I was saying to Renee, I've served twice now recently in India, and in both cases, and I say this hoping that none of the men are in the room, that we struggled not to pick all women, which is kind of interesting. Is that bad? We picked the best. We picked. The boys had done well when they came, but we always pick the best on the day. We're really keen to hear all of your experiences from so many different geographies and different sectors and different backgrounds and experiences. Musical accompaniment. There'll be a nice mix this weekend, I hope, of both thematic sessions where we talk about a bunch of in-depth things, but also time to meet and mingle together to reconnect. And also, I hope to form some nice intergenerational bonds, since mentoring and connection is one of the things that we've been getting the most out of in our intergenerational mixing. And hopefully a bit of time to enjoy Oxford. I don't know if we can count on this weather continuing, but it's awfully nice when we get it. Please also share your experiences over the weekend with the broader Rhodes community by using social media, and there is hashtag 40 Years Women, Rhodes Women, to help share those experiences. An event like this takes a huge amount of planning, and many of you in the room were involved in that. So I would like to say just a couple of thank yous. So first of all, I'd say thank you to the original Rhodes, leaders of the original Rhodes Women's Group, and those who initiated the 30th anniversary of Rhodes Women a decade ago, and I think 3 of them are here, Maria, Sachiko, Cecire, Heidi Stockel, and Noreen Khan. I haven't seen Noreen yet. Is she here? Anyway, those folks will be here who organized the original. I'd also like to thank the current Rhodes Women's Group, who played a really important role, and particularly the 3 co-conveners of the group, who will also be our masters of ceremonies through the weekend, Ashley Orr, Naying Ren, and Renee Verma. So raise your hands. Anyway, we'll be seeing lots of you. And also special thanks to scholar volunteers and Rhodes House staff members, and they'll be easy to spot because they're wearing bright blue shirts, and they should be happy to answer any questions that you have about the weekend. And finally, thanks to many of the Rhodes Scholars in the room who served on the committees who helped organize, and were many conference calls to help organize the program for the weekend and what we hope will be a rich experience. And then finally to Camilla, who's a constant support to the Trust and is involved in many aspects of the weekend. You look nervous. All good. This weekend is very much from the community for the community. So it's a weekend to reconnect with friends, to think back on your own time here, and also to think about how the Rhodes community can come together to serve some of the pressing problems of our time, large and small. The theme for the anniversary is I Stand Up For. And you'll see on the trees in the rotunda and around the house, many Rhodes women have already written in with the things that they're passionate about, the things that they stand up for. And please add your thoughts to the ones that are already there. One of the remarkable things about the Rhodes community is how it supports each of us in our intent to stand up for what we believe in. We've been working hard on how to renew the Rhodes Trust in its second century and to make it a genuine 21st century organization. With the current scholars, we put a huge amount of time and energy into our new character service and leadership development program, which is an attempt to deepen the experience and to very consciously reflect on what it means to lead in the current context, not the old way of thinking about leadership, what it means to serve and why we serve, and also how we can find balance and purpose in our lives. And I think it's been a great success. It's a program that Nadiya leads and that many have contributed to. On top of that, we have internships, mentoring, skills workshops, and a speaker series, all of which we hope deepen the current scholar experience. And since the close of our successful fundraising campaign, and it's very, very nice to put that behind us, thank you, all of you who contributed to that, we're really able to turn our attention outwards. And we've been adding more countries to the Rhodes Scholar list, which is exciting. We've gone from 32 countries now to 64 countries will be included this year. We hope by next year that we'll be a completely global scholarship. We started with, in 2013 with 83 scholars a year. This year, 100 scholars will come up. And I'm really excited to say in that group there'll be 2 Palestinians and 2 Israelis, and a Malaysian for the first time in a long time, and many other constituencies that we haven't seen. So we're really excited about that. One of the biggest moves, and others will talk about this, is a shift in the focus on individual achievement to more collaborative achievement. And that really means emphasizing lifelong fellowship, that working together to achieve to solve problems, we can be much more effective than we can as individual achievers. And so we'll be talking about that a lot this weekend, and we have been in our topic-specific convenings in Rhodes House, some of which you've participated in. So we're going into our 3rd Rhodes Healthcare Forum. We did our first Rhodes Venture Forum this year, and also an LGBTQ forum and a climate change forum. These are great ways for Rhodes scholars to put their shoulders together and work on some of these pressing problems, and we hope that that will continue to be a theme through your time here this weekend. I can say, I think genuinely, this is not your father's Rhodes Scholarship. Perhaps an appropriate theme given the weekend. I know many of you share our hope that as a community we can come together and advance gender equality and equity and empowerment. And we're convinced that doing that together, we can have much more impact than we can alone. This idea of lifelong fellowship, we hope, will be a catalyst to collaboration on that front and many others. We now have a short film that we hope will welcome you to the event and explains a little bit about how the scholarships are changing over time, and as well as highlighting the enormous diversity and in our community and depth of experience. So we'll show a brief film, and then I'll hand over to Karen.
Women, of course, couldn't apply for the Rhodes Scholarship until 40 years ago.
It very much has changed from the white, male, able-bodied person.
The Rhodes Scholarship increasingly stands for good, bright young people of any ethnicity, any religion, any race, and of course for women.
To one of Oxford's oldest colleges comes a Rhodes Scholarship winner. It all seems rather strange to him at first.
I think it's very useful for us to have moments in our lives where we simply stop and take stock of where we are and where we've come from.
The Rhodes 40th is important in that it's giving an opportunity for a woman from multiple generations to get together. It's always remarkable to reflect on how much things have changed. Oftentimes you feel as though things that you're going through, you're the first to have gone through them. Well, there was a woman who was once the only one in the entire department, the only one in the entire faculty.
There was the sense that we were all alone. If there had been a way to create a telephone line across those generations, we would have felt so much less isolated.
There was a lot of attention paid to the first women, and really an unfair burden. They were expected to, be superheroes.
It really was significantly different. Bathroom arrangements, all the way through to the kinds of syllabus that was available to you.
I think it's an important time to reflect on how much we have achieved, but also recognizing how much we still need to do. It's a fantastic opportunity to bring different generations together.
What's important in celebrating Rhodes Women is that we also interrogate what it means to be a leader and what it is to serve and really share around what they're standing up for in the world.
To me, standing up for the world means
Identifying with struggles for social justice.
Doing things that help the global community.
it's going to be an incredible gathering of women across these 40 years.
It's now my pleasure to introduce one of my heroes, Karen Stevenson, who many of you know, who's from the class of 1979, who was instrumental in the 30th anniversary of Rhodes Women. She's also a district secretary and selector for the Rhodes Trust and a trustee. And on top of that, she's a magistrate, a judge for the Central District of California. And she has spoken many times over the years powerfully about injustice and justice, and no one better equipped. So over to you, Karen.
Wow. It really is an honor to be here. I've had the opportunity to speak more than a few times in this room, things that I never thought I would do when I came up to Oxford in the Michaelmas term of 1979. I think we were the third class of Rhodes Women. I was also with just a handful of other Rhodes Scholar women that year. We were the first group of women to ever attend Magdalen since 1548. Yeah, this was that kind of place. And they really didn't quite know what to do with us. The porters didn't know what to do with us. The gardeners didn't know what to do with us. The dons didn't know what to do with us. And the young English undergrad boys really had no clue. Right. No clue whatsoever. But for those of us who are here from way back, it's really odd to be here now and be one of the geezers in the group. If you remember that Virginia Slims commercial, you've come a long way, baby. We've all come a long way. The Rhodes Scholarships have come a long way. And 10 years ago, we celebrated 30 years of Rhodes Women. And at the time, even though it had been 3 decades, those of us who were here, didn't it still feel like it was this new idea? Girls, Rhodes, they're here, they're smart. We're not there anymore. As we gather for this 40th anniversary, we are not an anomaly. We are not celebrating sort of a historical event. We are celebrating a mature community. We are leaders. We are women of power. We are women of influence. And that makes sense. If you think of our community in terms of an aggregate life cycle, like I'm old enough now to have kids in their 20s, some of us do. And one of them is here, in fact, with me. My son is here, my rakishly good-looking son, if I say so myself. But as you emerge out of your 20s and into your 30s, many of us had the experience of in our 30s, we were just sort of hitting our stride in our professions. We may have had young children. You still sort of were measuring yourself against perhaps other people's expectations a little bit. Am I doing okay? By the time you hit 40, you've got life under your belt, and you're less you have more confidence, not because someone's giving it to you, but because you've earned it, because you've lived it. You got a few scars of the wars, and you're owning it, you're claiming it. And by the time you're 40, as a friend of mine said, you learn to say no quickly. That's to boyfriends, jobs, you name it. But you learn to say no quickly because you are more centered in what your values really are for yourself, and there's less external referencing. That's where we are as a community. The community of Rhodes Women is 40. So now we are in a different place of not justifying our existence, but claiming our presence, owning our leadership, and mastering this journey. So that is where we are today. When we were here 30 years ago, there was also, for the 30th, 10 years ago, there was also this question floating in the air of, well, have the Rhodes Women really lived up to the vision? Have Rhodes Women really been successful with a big S? What does that mean? How do we measure success? And that's the other advantage of hitting your 40s. Tell it to the hand. I have lived long enough. I have worked hard enough. I have earned my scars and my gray hairs that I don't need you to tell me how to be successful. And we don't need to measure ourselves by external standards. All of us are smart. We are committed. We are challenged. We are working hard. We are striving. And so there's a comfort that comes when you're 40. And that is where we are as a community, and we now have something to share. Now, we won't even talk about what happens when you get to 50. And I celebrated my 60th birthday in December, which to me is unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. But there's a whole lot less, those of us who were here in the 70s, remember that Bonnie Raitt song, The Nick of Time? Time gets mighty precious when there's less of it to waste. And that's where we are. We have these days together as a community. This is a remarkable time. I thank you all for traveling from the corners of the globe, from leaving family and friends. I know some of you may have young children you need to make arrangements for. It is no small thing that we are gathered here today. And many others will be joining us. And I want to say welcome and good morning to hundreds of people who are actually joining us by live stream this weekend. When we had our first conference call, and I really want to call out Rodolfo Laura as a planner for pulling this together here at Rhodes House. When we had one of the early conference calls, one of the comments I made was, this is a long way to come for the weekend. So we need to have some substance here. Reunions are often about reminiscences and nostalgia, and while this place is beautiful, it is charming. It is enchanting to be at Oxford, especially when the sun's shining. I don't go to many reunions. It's just not my thing, but I come here because this is a community of meaning and a community of substance where I engage with friends and with students across generations. It's a real honor to be a part of the trustees and be able to be here a couple of times a year and support the scholars in residence in ways that we, those of us 77, 78, 79, 85, were never supported. This building itself exemplifies the change in the Rhodes community. When us early scholars, women scholars came up, this was a very ceremonial setting. You came up for your coming up dinner, your going down dinner, you got a check, and pretty much if you came to see the warden on any other occasion, you were probably in trouble. That is not the case. This is a robust place. Scholars are here many nights of the week they're here for brown bag events. They are here for speakers. We have convened forums on healthcare, on innovation, on public policy. There's so much cross communication that goes on in this place, and we want to do more of it. We want this to be a lifelong community of learning, a lifelong community of innovation and support for one another across the years. So as we gather this weekend, I want to affirm that we are, in fact, leaders, and that as Rhodes Women, we have succeeded. Let no one in this room doubt that we, as women, have somehow diminished the vision of fighting the world's fight, that we have somehow not lived up to the challenge. As a district secretary, I can tell you last year in our applicant pool in the Southern California, the applicants were running 2-to-1 women to men in the original pool of applicants. Somehow, and we select on merit, we ended up with a nearly 50-50 balance in the students that we interviewed, and I was shocked because I thought it was going to be like 11-4 based on the number of applicants. So we belong here. That is not a new concept. But How are we going to reach back and support the scholars that are here now? The guys have had the Old Boys Network. They have called on their friendships, their cross-references for jobs, their golfing pals, belong to clubs. There's been, the Old Boys Network. Well, I don't want to have an old girls network. I just want to have a community. I want to have a community that supports us across our efforts in the work that we do in the world that we are passionately committed to. I got an email recently about a women's conference for prominent women in the law, and it had a little tagline that says, "This is not a conference to discuss women's issues. We want to talk about power and influence." Well, if women hold up half the sky, tell me how clean air is not a women's issue. Tell me how educating girls is only a women's issue. Tell me how ending disease and dealing with the refugee crisis on this planet is not a women's issue. Everything is a women's issue because we're here and this world is ours now to care for. So let's celebrate the work that we do, but let's also acknowledge that we do it in the context of everything that we value and everything that we care about. So does that mean we don't struggle in our careers? Does that mean we don't deal with challenging failures in our careers? No. Does that mean some of us haven't been discriminated against in jobs? It happens today, it happens here, it happens in colleges in Oxford. Someone was telling me this morning that recently they just hired the first African fellow to teach in the African Studies department at Oxford. We got work to do, ladies. So when you say we're not here to talk about women's issues, we are indeed here to talk about women's issues because we are here to talk about the world that we live in, the world that we care about, the world that we're passionate about, and the world that we will give to our sons and our daughters. So, I want to talk about some rules of engagement for the weekend as we go forward. First off, can we agree that there is no perfect woman? First rule of engagement, all right? Everybody's journey is worthy of respect. Some people took the long way home. Some people look like they've had it easy. You don't know until you actually engage with that person, engage with that woman about what her journey has actually been. Can we agree that our bodies are our own? Can we agree to stop letting other people tell us how to be women? Whatever our size and shape, and trust me, time and gravity are undefeated in terms of our forms. If we have kids, great. If we want kids, great. If we don't want kids, can we support her too? Is that okay? If we take time off from an apparently impressive, prestigious career to raise the kids we do have, can we agree that she did not fail? A lot of people don't know that Sandra Day O'Connor took 8 years off to raise her kids. She still made it to the Supreme Court. No one holds that against her. Let's not hold that against one another. And if we decide to go balls to the wall in our career and we don't want to marry and we don't want to have kids, can we agree that that's all right too? Can we agree to stop cursing one another for our choices? How can we stand up for the world if we don't stand up for one another? So this weekend, I hope you will find time to reconnect, to reminisce with friends, and maybe connect with some not so like-minded friends. Let us listen deeply to one another, respectfully to one another. We have this precious time of these few days when this gathering of women from all parts of the globe, from all professions and all walks of life and all backgrounds, to have a conversation and to continue that conversation going forward. The young scholars who are here, they are eager to know how we did it. They want to know about our journey, and they don't want to just know about the pretty, shiny parts. They want to know what we did when we failed. They want to know what we did when we didn't get our dream job. They want to know what we did when we were depressed. They want to know how we dealt with the death of a parent, or the death of a child, or the end of a marriage. They want to know who we are. They want to know that their journey is going to be okay as women. So, can we agree that we will not judge each other, but we will listen to one another, and that we will engage deeply and be here for one another, and that this community, so that this is not a reunion to look back and just reminisce about the not so good old days. And for some of us, being at Oxford was hard. This was not all puppy dogs and lollipops for many of the women that were here, particularly women of color. And it isn't now necessarily. This is an extraordinary experience to have. But what we don't want you to go away from this time and this place is thinking that this Rhodes Scholarship experience is some dusty trophy on your resume. This is a living community that we hope you will find this time one of support and one of nourishment for you, that you can dip into, reach into, tap into, and call on at any time as we make this journey together. So in that spirit, I'd like to close with a few stanzas from Dr. Maya Angelou and her poem that she delivered at the UN Security Council, A Brave and Startling Truth. And she had this to say: when we come to it, we, this people on this minuscule and kithless globe, who reach daily for the bomb, the blade, and the dagger, yet who petition in the dark for tokens of peace. We, this people on this moat of matter, in whose mouths abide cankerous words which challenge our very existence, yet out of those same mouths come songs of such exquisite sweetness that the heart falters in its labor, and the body is quieted into awe. We, this people, on this small and drifting planet, whose hands can strike with such abandon that in a twinkling, life is sapped from the living. Yet those same hands can touch with such healing, such irresistible tenderness, that the haughty neck is happy to bow, and the proud back is glad to bend. Out of such chaos, of such contradiction, we learn that we are neither devils nor divines. When we come to it, we, this people, on this wayward, floating body, created on this earth, of this earth, have the power to fashion for this earth a climate where every man and every woman can live freely, without sanctimonious piety, without crippling fear. When we come to it, we must confess that we are the possible, we are the miraculous, the true wonder of this world. That is when, and only when, we come to it. Let us proclaim that we have come to it this weekend to do this work. We honor you, we celebrate you, we welcome you, and we want to nourish you and nourish one another in this time. Welcome back to Rhodes House.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen and Charles, for some enriching and inspiring words. Good morning. On behalf of all the scholars in residence and the Rhodes Women group, I am delighted to welcome you all back to Oxford and to Rhodes House. The Rhodes Women co-conveners, Nying, Ashley, and myself, and a diligent team of volunteers are serving over the weekend. We're happy to assist with any queries, requirements you may have, and we wish you a pleasant flight. There are 4 exit doors. That worked better in my head, but it's okay. In the 40th year of Rhodes Scholarships for Women, the Rhodes Women Group welcomes all scholars identifying as femme, genderqueer, non-binary, and women as we affirm and support each other and explore themes and ideas regarding gender. We hope to build community and fellowship across generations of scholars through events like these and mentoring, commit to intellectual collaboration with other Rhodes groups and local collectives in Oxford, and to continue to critically interrogate what the social and political category of woman means to the Rhodes community and to all of us. And indeed, in celebrating 40 years of Rhodes Women, we hope to recognize and reflect on the power of these words, applauding the tremendous and trailblazing efforts of the first generation of scholars like Maria, Heidi, Nadiya, who were instrumental in organizing the 30 Years of Rhodes Women Conference and exploring where we are 10 years on. We hope to hold space for the triumphs of the exemplary women scholars in this room today, but to also hold space for the extraordinary women who could not be in this room, be it scholars from different parts of the world and the women in generations prior to 1977, whose contributions continue to make our worlds better, the women who have built us and held us in all our strengths and vulnerabilities, our friends, sisters, co-workers, mothers, parents, partners, daughters, mentors, mentees, fictional characters. Yet, we hope this weekend gives us time to pause. We may have come a long way, baby, but there are no end games in a politics of liberation, in a politics of the everyday. There are only shifting horizons. In appreciating the myriad experiences womanhood, the Rhodes Scholarship, and their intersections produce, the diligent team at Rhodes House have attempted to frame a weekend involving dialogue, listening, sharing ideas, to envision what those shifting horizons might look like. What does it mean to conceive of positive communities, communities of care and resistance and solidarity through gender and beyond gender? What does it mean to acknowledge how universal the challenges we face are, the silences we face are, but the particularity of our experiences, our positions, our privileges, and differences? Because seldom do shared histories mean the same histories. And maybe it is in uniting, not despite, but indeed because of difference, that we can forge new vocabularies, expanding notions of womanhood and personhood, confronting the legacies of the scholarship, and decolonizing our resistances every day, understanding the power of radical love for oneself and for others. We hope this celebration and the deliberations it generates will continue beyond these 3 days, because as the inspiring women in this room have shown us, there is work. There is always work. Addressing and redressing injustice, silence, and complicity are nebulous, and this work is messy, beautiful, exhilarating, but deeply fraught with challenges. And with Maya Angelou blessing us, still like air, we rise. Before we proceed with the day's sessions, a couple of housekeeping reminders and logistical information. The name badges provided to you serve as passes for entry into conference events. We'd request you to keep them with you at all times over the weekend. There will be volunteers in blue shirts stationed around conference rooms to guide you from one session to the next. And we'd also like to remind you that most of the sessions will be recorded and live streamed. Hello, camera, for the benefit of scholars unable to attend the weekend's proceedings. After most sessions, there will be space for questions from the audience. We'll have 2 student volunteers passing the mic for questions. In the interest of time, we might not be able to accommodate all questions, and in recognizing a lot of ideas, concerns, and themes might arise over the course of the conference, we have 2 whiteboards in the Roseberry and Atlantic rooms. We hope these could function as living documents for the weekend and provide us with issues and topics to discuss on the final day's unconference, which are largely unstructured sessions where we share thoughts and feedback for the future. We encourage all of you to share thoughts, photos, memes of me on social media with the hashtag 40 Years Rhodes Women. And finally, a content note. There will be a range of topics covered and intimate sharing encouraged, some of which may touch on issues that trigger participants. If during any sessions anyone experiences discomfort, we would welcome you to self-moderate. Please feel free to step out. For your convenience, there is a quiet room downstairs, which is down the west staircase and through the scholars' room. It is available as a safe room for the whole weekend, except on Sunday between 10:45 to 1 p.m. Thank you all for being a lovely, lovely audience, and we're honored to have you back. Without further ado, I would now like to invite the inimitable Nadiya Figueroa, Dean of Scholarships and Director of Leadership and Change, Rhodes House, to introduce and moderate the opening plenary. Thank you very much.
we've been welcomed and warmed and called to work and action and overwhelmed with the excitement of being here. So it is our distinct privilege and pleasure to kick off the program with really a conversation. And we sank in with each other this morning talking about what we hope to achieve with this panel, which is more than anything else, beginning to open up the space for the reflecting, the intimate sharing, and very importantly, the collective visioning of, well, where do we go from here? So let me begin by way of brief introduction of my fellow panelists. Of course, in their beautiful program, there's a more extensive background, and you will hear more about them as the panel unfolds. But let's start with Maria Sachiko Cecire, Virginia and Keble, 2006, Assistant Professor of Literature at Bard College, Founding Director of the Experimental Humanities Program there, whose work focuses on children's culture, gender, race, media, and medieval literature and its afterlives. We have Shahana Rasool, South Africa at Large and St. Cross, 1998, Associate Professor in Social Work and Social Policy at the University of Johannesburg, an activist, researcher, trainer, and academic in the field of gender, with a special focus on gender-based violence, and whose work has taken her across South Africa and Australia and to other places. We have Roopa, Unnikrishnan, India and Balliol, 1995, currently Global Head of Strategy at Harman International, with an extensive background in consulting, specializing in strategy development, managing people, and innovative technology, also a published poet and a world-class athlete in riflery. We're also joined by Penelope Brook, New Zealand and Nuffield, 1985, who joined the Rhodes Trust in January as inaugural director of the Atlantic Institute. Before that, she was ombudswoman at the World Bank, having served in several different capacities at the bank, with a focus on improving services and opportunities for the most vulnerable, with posts that spanned Africa, South and East Asia, and Latin America. We also have Denise Thal with us from Michigan and Jesus, 1977, who has spent her life in mission-driven organizations in both government and nonprofit sectors, currently the Executive Vice President for Business Operations at Planned Parenthood of Michigan. She has taught in finance, she has managed a museum, and she has served as a school board president. So walking through the flow of the conversation this morning, we will start with reflections on the issues that we have cared about as Rhodes women who take a stand in the world. We'll talk about some of the progresses and some of the achievements there, but also where there are gaps, where we're not satisfied with the current state of things. We'll move into some intimate sharing around what it has meant to us to be Rhodes women, and then we will move on to the visioning. So shall we start with Shahana, whose work touches on gender-based violence, and who yesterday evening began a very important conversation with me on, yes, my work is political, but Nadiya, it always begins with the personal.
Sawubona. Kunjani. It's an absolute honor to be here. I stand up for social, cultural, and economic justice. And I think that for me, being a South African, looking at issues of discrimination has been central with our history of apartheid. So issues of race, class, disability, sexuality, ethnicity, religion, and so forth. We can't look at issues of gender without looking at these cross-cultural issues because they impact on each other. And our understanding and work can't isolate gender from these other issues. Otherwise, we don't move forward. And this is really important in terms of our intent. What is our intent to serve? And how do we serve to create change around these issues? What is our deeper motive around creating this kind of change when we want to challenge and change the world? And I think, as Nadiya said in the conversation we had yesterday, for me, the issue of the personal is political stood out so much as one of the key feminist philosophies that has driven my life, because it started with challenging the patriarchal culture in my own home before moving to community. And I came to Oxford and applied for the Rhodes Scholarship because I was trying to get away from home, from my patriarchal father, only to come to Oxford, where there were more closed doors and a strongly patriarchal, very white male-dominated culture. So it was a very interesting experience and a challenging experience being in Oxford. And then I kept running away home from the cold and rain. So it's this interesting tension between how do we create liberation in our own spaces, because that's the beginning of challenging the social cultural oppression. Thank you.
Thank you. Roopa, as someone who has worked and risen within the corporate world, I mean, so much has been written about shattering the glass ceiling, but then we still hear, well, are we leaning in enough? Share with us some of your reflections.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that struck me as I started in consulting, which is where I got my my initial sort of pathway into business, I remember sort of engaging and seeing very few women in the boardrooms that I would walk into. And I just said, okay, data point, we'll reflect on that later. But I was also involved with a group called Sachiko, which was focused on ending domestic violence. And the commonality across all of the women I would work with was their separation from sources of wealth. They did not seem to have the power, whether they handed their cash over to the husband or they had no access to work. So the numbers were starting to click into place for me. So for me, it was very clear that I was going to be very, engaging around this issue of ensuring that women have the rights to economic freedom. And that is my cause, as it were. And so I think as part of what I do is sort of overt. I will actually ensure that when we look at resumes for roles in my organization, I'd say, I'm expecting to see 75% of the resumes to women. I'll say that to the HR people because that means you'll get 40%, right? So I think there's an explicitness in what we ask for that's required. As well as I think, I fund, I'm an angel investor, and I had a case where there was a startup that came up to me for funding, and I said, you're working on healthcare and you want to sort of look at analytics. All your analytics seem to skew a certain way. That's only because of the 12 people in your organization working on health, all are men, right? I look at your advisory board, all are men. You're coming to me for funding, come back in about a month, and here's a list of women who can be your advisors, because the people who make healthcare decisions in companies, 80% of them are actually HR, right? They make the insurance decision, are women. At least 50% of the women in the workforce, people in the workforce are women. So I expect you actually to reflect the people you're going to analyze, because that was what they were doing. A month later, they come back, they have a woman advisor, and I write them a small check, but a check. And I think so this sort of very, convincing, concrete, consistent pressure needs to be kept at all fours. And I think whether we're working on social, economic, political arenas, I think very explicit. And I mean, I do it in a gentle way, but it's always clear that I'm not going to back off. And I think that's the only thing one can do. And the numbers skew. I mean, I think, the last board I was in, which was the Board of Innovation Entrepreneurs, we had 2 roles open up, and of course the Old Boys Network had these great names, and I said, why, I'm not going to sign off. Here are 2 women's names, both you guys need to go meet them. I'm not going to force them on you. You need to meet them. And of course, when they came back, the 2 women were on the board. So I think we have to personally put behind, do the homework and provide the names and keep being consistent, so.
Thank you, thank you. So disrupting the power dynamics sometimes in our own homes and into the communities in which we belong, but also in the major institutions that we become power brokers within. Yeah. Denise, you're in an area that is central to women having autonomy over their own lives, reproductive health. I wonder if you want to give us some reflections on changes over the years, over the decades, and sometimes we feel we make progress, but then there are setbacks, and we have to keep going.
Well, unfortunately, reproductive justice, reproductive rights is one of those areas where there certainly has not been a straight upward trajectory. unlike, I would say, women in athletics, when my good friend and doubles partner from college were in college, we had all kinds of issues with women getting the same access to practice facilities, matches, et cetera, et cetera. We were in the gym practicing, the basketball team was practicing once, and the janitor turned the lights out on us because he didn't think women should be using the varsity gym for practice. It sort of feels like there's a lot of progress there. Reproductive rights, on the other hand, you know, in some ways has gotten much worse. Now, I am old enough to remember the days before Roe versus Wade. And, you know, where a doctor, when I was in high school, approached me and just on the side said, you know, if you ever get in trouble, just let me know and I'll help you take care of it. And I knew exactly what he was talking about. That was fine because I knew doctors. But low-income women never knew people like that. And so obviously there were a lot of unwanted pregnancies, a lot of people died. You'd think 40, 50 years later we would be in better shape. And we are not, which is kind of stunning to me. So I guess the lesson is you can't ever give up the fight even when there's legislation. This is obviously, I'm talking about the US. Other countries, some are better, some are worse, but you can't ever give up the fight and rest, unfortunately, which is really kind of horrifying, actually. And it's not just true in this issue, I think it's true in lots of issues. So I guess, you know, keep it up and don't stop caring about important issues, because you never know where the backlash is going to come from.
I mean, a brief follow-up for you, Denise. What would you say about intergenerational connectivity when you were looking at these long-term pushes for progress, as we are with reproductive rights, and maybe even across geographies? Because as you'd say, the right for abortion or the right to have some type of, you know, planning around your reproductive health is in a different state in the US than it is in Jamaica, where I come from, than it is in other countries.
To be honest, I don't know a lot about across geographies, so can't speak to that. In terms of generations, when I was younger, I think women of all generations were in this because they had all faced the same kind of thing. You know, I think there are so many battles to be fought that it's understandable once there's legislation that everybody, women included, would turn their attention to other fights that needed to be fought. And, you know, so I know at Planned Parenthood, we work really hard to try and get young people back involved, if you will. And, you know, unfortunately these days we've had help from a new administration who's doing a lot of galvanizing for us. But, you know, I get it. There are so many battles to be fought that it's hard to keep going and fighting the old ones. But we need everybody.
Thank you. Thinking about what it means to be a Rhodes woman and also what the experience is like kind of in residence as a Rhodes Scholar. And Maria sees me looking at her because she was a huge part of my experience when I was here. I actually remember being in the MCR at a meeting that she facilitated at Keble, which is one of the most male-dominated colleges as far as its culture, and her speaking very passionately about why it was that we had to have a celebration for the Rhodes 30th and the amount of work that went into that. Maria, maybe you can kick us off on your own Rhodes experience, lessons there.
Sure. I mean, I'm going to start even before I got here. I remember the night after I was awarded the scholarship, going back to the little hotel where I was staying and climbing into the bed and pulling the covers over my head and having an enormous cry. I, of course, was delighted and excited, but I had never expected that this would happen, and suddenly all of my plans for my life were shattered in a really exciting way, but also this really terrifying way, where suddenly I felt I had not just the opportunity, but the responsibility to completely reimagine what my future could be. And how I could give back and be of service to the world. These really smart, amazing people had just told me that I could fight the world's fight, so I damn well better do it, all right? But my plan had been to do important work, teaching. I wanted to teach the 5th grade, and expected maybe to have a family, stay in the States. Suddenly, everything was changing, and I came to Oxford feeling like a little bit of a fraud. I think a lot of people did. And I was so strengthened by being able to meet other scholars. In the beginning, it was mainly women who were willing to talk about this with each other, who felt the same way. And so then I realized, oh, maybe I do belong here, because here are all these incredible ass-kicking women who feel like me. So I know it's not true of them, so maybe it's not totally true of me. And so out of these conversations, these informal conversations, we decided to start to formalize and put together the Rhodes Women group. We're really helped in this by Professor Elizabeth Falaise, who is one of the Rhodes trustees, unfortunately passed on from a disease before her time, but was so important for us in the kind of 2006, 2007 years. She put together a lunch. She told us her amazing Oxford stories, kind of like, you're talking about having the lights turned off on you. When she started at St. John's in the 90s, she was the first woman fellow who had ever been hired there. And the male Don still passed around pictures of the incoming students to decide which women they were going to take on for tutorials. Oh my God. I remember that's the sound that we all made. We're like, and it had only been just about 10 years ago when we were in the room, right, that had happened. And then we all had our own crazy stories. And I remember one of my own constituents, from my own class, in jest, I guess, telling me to go and be quiet and iron something at one point. These things are still part of the discourse, I guess. So having a group of women to share stories and to laugh with, to be shocked with, and then to put together an event where we could bring back women from all across the decades was so powerful. We learned so much. Karen Stevenson's talk was, I think, probably one of the most important things that happened to me at Oxford. Hearing that, life is long. You have a minute. You don't have to do it right this second. And you have this community that's willing to help you. That was so important for me. And, has really helped me in making decisions that I've made going forward and helped me to try and not create a composite woman out of the best of all my friends and measure myself against that woman, but rather to take it one day at a time and to be able to celebrate the things that I'm doing and still be inspired and push myself, but be proud of the things that I've done.
I mean, 2 really important themes there that we hope to pick up on throughout the weekend is that, one, there's a sense that you're elevated by the scholarship, and there's a sense of duty, which is powerful, but there's also a burden of expectation. And I know for many of the current scholars, that's part of the power of having the intergenerationality, is that how you may feel sometimes a little bit anxious, a little bit under it as far as carrying this mantle. That's human, and others have felt that way as well. And of course, also the power in the collective, that it's always more work that can be done and more comfort that can be had when you see it as more than an individual mission, that we're in this collectively. And I turn now to Penelope, who, it's such a joy having you here with the Atlantic Institute that's recently been launched. And we share a special kinship in coming from smaller islands. But when we look at your career trajectory from New Zealand to World Bank, here with Rhodes, what were those years like for you here? Did that impact your trajectory at all? Did it give or take anything that gave you something going forward?
So Nadiya kind of promised that she'd give me the question that took me way out of my comfort zone. So the substance is easy, this stuff is harder, so thanks for that. Well, it's been sort of reflecting. I was here in '84, and then '77 seemed a long time ago. We felt that Rhodes Women had been here for a while, that we had shoulders that we were resting on. Now it seems like almost at the beginning. This is time stretches in these strange ways. So I think my application for the Rhodes Scholarship story is a little bit embarrassing, and it's a story that I think speaks to my ability to try constantly to navigate between the quicksands of imposter syndrome and the rock falls of excessive arrogance. That path you find between between self-confidence and fearing you're going to sort of wake up and people will suddenly know, what a fraud you are. I think a very common thing. I applied for the scholarship. I hadn't been thinking about it at all, and there were 3 of us doing Masters in Economics at Auckland University my year, and one of the men said, I'm applying for the Rhodes Scholarship. I believe I have a really good chance. And I thought, wow, I never thought that might be something that I would apply for. And apologies to this poor man, because he did not get a Rhodes Scholarship, but inspired me to do so. And I think sort of from this path between thinking, yes, I can do that, fearing that maybe I can't, fearing people will think that I can't, has been a constant theme for me. I went to Nuffield. I think there have been 7 Rhodes women who've gone to Nuffield. I was the first. I'm looking forward to meeting some of the others. To go to Nuffield is kind of to throw yourself at it. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. It provides you with a tight community of people who care deeply about the substance that you care about. In my year, there were 8 economists, 1 woman. That seemed to be about a pattern. And I was the one policy wonk. My idea of how I would be of service was very much in the policy sphere. I wanted to work in international development. The rest of my colleagues wanted to do math. And so I was what a young Atlantic fellow that I've recently met called the N of 1 in my group. And I think being the N of 1 is terrifying and potentially lonely. But it also forces you to really think about your resources. And for me, I think 2 things that have fed through my work, including at the World Bank, and thinking about what kind of leader I could be and wanted to be and how to hold true to that, come from these pieces of trying to listen better to myself, to be pretty honest with those inner voices that are asking me, for example, are you being courageous and resilient, or are you just being bloody-minded and stubborn? Which is it? Be truthful with yourself here. Are you being resilient about not being overly defensive in the face of criticism, or are you missing some really important things that you're not wanting to hear? So sort of the managing that stuff. But also the thinking about how to listen really hard to context, to the needs of others, but also in feedback, to listen for that feedback which comes from a place of good intentions and common mission, and be very attentive to that, and kind of filter out some of the other stuff. So maybe just before I stop talking too much, some of my favorite pieces of feedback. I arrived at the World Bank, and again, because I was kind of throwing myself at it, was working on water and sanitation, which was then not a particularly female field. In my first performance evaluation, my manager sat me down and said, let me read to you the feedback from your most senior colleague. This began, she's a nice girl, but, and mostly this guy was one who said, look, I'm going to ignore the first bit and kind of like focus on where you can go. Second piece of feedback as I was moving into the management stream was from a female coach who said the one thing you must do if you want to be taken seriously is cut your hair. I fired the coach. I'm not sure whether it was right or wrong, but that was not helpful feedback. Particularly, I felt. But I think as sort of, can I have one last thing, or you want me to turn it off? Okay.
This is why you get the difficult question.
I sat next to you so you could kind of kick me gently if I was going on too much. This is the hardest role I had when I was with the World Bank, was being sent down to Argentina to manage the relationship with Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. The Argentines weren't wildly happy with what they thought was a British woman going down who might talk about the Falklands, which we sorted out. But the challenge that I felt that I had going down there was I had developed what felt to me like a true leadership style from me, which sought to be inclusive, sought to be listening, probably felt a little bit soft, and the concern that my client, the government, and my staff would be confused by this in an office, in a society in which people were accustomed to very strong models of leadership. My predecessor was a Latin American man, and they got him, and I was weird for them. So really important for me in that context to have people who saw past the power of my title to give me really good feedback about when I was making myself hard to understand, not only because my Spanish was pretty weird, but also because my behaviors didn't conform to what they saw as strong leadership. This fear of, if she's like this with the government, will she put us at risk? And that for me was a wonderful education, which I'm still trying to live through, of how do you hold true to yourself while recognizing that your way of being true will play very differently with different people, and you need to translate yourself. I think what mattered in the end was a sense of my having boundaries and being trustworthy, but being able to sort of find a way of expressing that people could respond to, more difficult. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Penelope. That for me actually brings to mind one of the cornerstones of our programming here with scholars, which is that leadership is not something that you just achieve all at once. You constantly practice. And listening to you, I'm hearing about the practice of listening, and also the practice that you gained in being the N of one, sometimes the only of your sort, and then also the practice you gained at not conforming, you know, and gaining confidence in not conforming, but also taking feedback on the chin and doing away with the feedback that wasn't so helpful. Denise, to you again, because we're mindful that you were one of the women in the first cohort that had women. And when you look back at your initiation into the Rhodes Woman experience, are there any cherished memories of your time here? I'm thinking of something you shared last night, but I'm not going to put you on the spot, as far as a support system that perhaps you gained while here, and how that has helped to be a base for you throughout a lifetime of service. But just over to you on any cherished on any cherished memories from those early days.
What Nadiya is referring to isn't what I was actually going to say.
Go with what you were going to go for. Go with what you were going to go for.
Say a couple things, and then I'll get back to that, and I'll try to be quick. I was in the first group of women. I think all of us experienced this "we're frauds" thing, and unfortunately, although at the same time, obviously, to do what everybody had done, many of us, probably most of us, hadn't really cared a lot what people think, because you couldn't to do some of that, but still had this idea that we were frauds, but also a certain amount of hubris, because after all, we had gotten Rhodes scholarships. But what we didn't have is what many of you have now. Rhodes House was not a community for us. You know, it was more like Karen described, where, you know, a couple fancy dinners and an annual meeting with the warden to go over how you were doing, feedback from your professors and that sort of thing. And so I really envy those of you here now, because you have this community that I think is so great and so much more important to thriving here, and really wish we had had something like that. Ours were more individually constructed. And you know, maybe later in the Q&A I can speak more to the burden of being a Rhodes Scholar, because I think there's definitely some of that there. I do want to say that, you know, most of us women in that first class had a very clear understanding that there were a lot of women before us who really were the ones who fought the battles to make the first class happen. We got all the credit and all of the publicity, but I do want to be clear, and that's true in any kind of activity for social justice. The people often who get the credit aren't the people who really did the hard work, but it was particularly true in this situation. So it was, you know, a little bit odd, because we were getting all this publicity, we were novelty, all of that, and we felt like, you know, we just want to be normal Rhodes Scholars. You know, we don't want to be special because we're in this first class. So we did have that burden. I think for me and for many of us, my substitute for the community here was a Sunday afternoon football game that mostly Yanks, but other people from other countries participated in, and it was really the community that helped us grow and thrive, get through the winters and that sort of thing. And out of that came 4 marriages, including my own. So that was important for us, and we still go back to those friends and have ties to them. But I do appreciate what Rhodes House has done to improve things for the new classes coming up.
I mean, one of the reasons why I was cheekily pushing you is that we see this pattern of, folks who serve, and lead in their own way, often reference their support system. And sometimes that's a lifetime partner, sometimes it's family, sometimes it's friendship. And we do hope that through the Rhodes community, there's a lot of that, because we can't talk about doing the work if we're not talking about how we're sustaining ourselves in doing the work. So we're gonna do one last round, but I should say to the audience, please do queue up your questions, or even just points that you want to share, because we're gonna head into the Q&A segment of things. But before we do that, let's hear from each one of you, and take it in the direction you want to. But what do you hope for from this weekend? What would be success for this weekend for you? And looking forward, so we've talked about issues that women are standing up for, and we've talked about the Rhodes experience and what it has meant and continues to mean. But what do we hope for the next 40 years? And I see Shahana at the end there. I want to start with her.
Thanks, Nadiya. So for me, I think one of the important things is how do we develop our international collaboration and strengthen each other as women, but also look at creating access and opportunities for other women in our communities. So how do we create opportunities and access for other disadvantaged women? And one of the things that I was talking about with our college, St. Cross and department was to create another scholarship maybe for other young women who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. So who may not have and be able to have the same educational opportunities that we've had, because we know that education is one of the key drivers for social development. And so for me, I guess, Karen, you were referring to the all boys club. So we don't want the all-boys club, but how do we as women support each other? And we can only scale up development when we have these strong collaborations with people who have access to networks, to power, to opportunity. And how do we create those links in a much stronger, profound way so I can call up anyone in this room at any point and saying, you work in this area, I know someone who needs this. Let's connect. Let's create this opportunity. Let's, make it work for younger, disadvantaged people.
Roopa?
I think I'd like to sort of, I won't say mimic, but reinforce that element, because with 40 years, I think now we have a library of women Rhodes scholars who should be touching pretty much every key area of social, economic, political sphere that we want to be in, we as a community want to be in. So I'm wondering whether there's something to be done concretely to engage and say, okay, I really want to make a difference in the startup world. Here are the 3 names that you should at least, reach out to. I mean, I got a note the other day, just a day or 2 ago, the Indian Rhodes scholars will be coming in, and I saw two women in the name, and I thought I have to write a note to say, let me talk to some of them, because I remember the huge gap between where I was coming from, small southern state of India, to here, and it seemed insurmountable at that point in time. And so I think that there's an element of, there's the systematic effort we need to do, but there's also a personal element that needs to be put in place to ensure that we are leveraging what we bring to the table. And I thought I'd also say, you've been told to cut your hair. I spent my whole life being told to grow my hair. So how do you actually create a forum where you're getting useful feedback? I think that's the key here.
One of the morals of the story is trust yourself, respect yourself, please yourself. Penelope.
Yeah. What they said. I think also, maybe Karen, I'm echoing you and not doing it so well, but I think there are so many stories and so much experience in this room and with the colleagues who'll be joining us subsequently. I sort of felt sitting at breakfast, I wanted to know more about the stories of every single person who was at the table. And I think it is a chance for us to, yes, certainly reconnect with people that we already love, but especially to hear the stories of others and to make new, perhaps unlikely connections. And I think those will help inform the kinds of collaborations that can be world-changing.
And Maria, who was speaking earlier about the mission she's been given by, is it the 20-plus women who helped to organize the 30th celebration?
Yeah, well, I would like to first shout them out because I was on a message chain with over about 20 women on Facebook being like, okay, ladies, what do you want me to say? So hi to those of you who are streaming around the world. I know some of you are. And, you know, one thing that we took away from organizing the 30th anniversary was just how powerful it is to work together with amazing people, and particularly, in our case, amazing women. I have never had a more low drama, high efficiency, just like pleasurable organizing experience in my life. And a couple of us were actually tweeting about this last night. We're saying, you know, I would join whatever firm was made out of all those women tomorrow. I don't know, whatever we do, whatever. And, you know, and actually this is kind of speaking to what, you know, you all are saying about mentorship and being able to access a community. I would love to see us in the next 10 years make things together across the generations. So when you work together and you make things together, that's when you really get to know each other. And then you can say, you know what, actually, you know, Nadiya has this amazing background in X and can really do what you're looking for. And then you can connect people, I think, better than even just being friends. So I'd love to see us do that. And just to channel a little bit again of what some of our, or my friends and colleagues around the world have suggested, you know, to remember to be thinking about things like, just because you can do anything doesn't mean you should do everything. You know, that idea is something that is really powerful and important. And back to this notion of defining success for yourself, right? Something that you can do and should do. And one thing I'd love to see us go forward is to, even to ease the burden on ourselves a little bit, is to start to do that kind of visioning together as a community. You know, I remember being told that you can't just expect to be deployed. You know, just, you're a Rhodes Scholar, you can't be expected to go deploy me for the good of the world. You have to figure out what you need to do, right? You know? So you have to figure out how to be deployed. And that is very overwhelming. I am still working on this. I would love to work on this with other people, you know, together. How do we figure out together how we should be deployed? So that's something I'd love to see going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. And over to the audience, I've seen lots of nods, laughter at different points, some notes being jotted down, questions, points that you'd like to raise with the panel and with each other.
Hi, my name's Bethany Ellman. I'm from Missouri and Keble 2004. I'll kick it off with the first question. And my question is for Roopa, but anyone should feel free to weigh in. So I work in the physical sciences, and I've been really impressed to observe the growing number of women that I've seen, even over the course of my career, rising to positions of influence. Hopefully I am becoming one of those as well. But I'm curious about the phenomena that seems to be happening in some circles within Silicon Valley in terms of the startups, and in terms of, I see this also in our computer science undergrads coming to Caltech. There originally was this flux of women into the field, and now it seems that some of these areas are sort of becoming more male and I'm curious, Roopa, as someone who has maybe a front row seat to this phenomenon, how you think that we can continue the progress that has been occurring over the decades and sort of not see the tide go back the other direction. And anyone else who wants to weigh in on this what is really a sociological question more than anything, I think.
I mean, I think this is a very typical phenomenon. I mean, if you go down and walk down, Short Hill Road, you'll find that is a bro culture, right? Where money agglomerates, the men will go there. And so But I think if you were to, take off that sort of focus on Silicon Valley and look at where innovation is happening, so like free yourself from all of those, paradigms. In New York, the majority of investment decisions that get made, deals that get made, 55 to 60% go to female-founded organizations, right? In Shanghai, you have a significant number of startups that have women at the helm. So I think we need to start saying Silicon Valley, all well and good, great culture. There are only so many ride-sharing apps we need, right? We need to have startups, London. I mean, startups happen elsewhere, and their money has to come from elsewhere as well, and that's the key. We found that, the data is there, right? I think the frustration comes from us not using the data. Startups which have female leadership tend to last longer, do better, right? And now the issue is we don't have enough women in private equity, in venture capital, who are making those funding decisions. We found that if a male venture capitalist or private equity partner has a colleague who's female, he has a higher probability of funding a startup, a female-founded startup. The woman doesn't even have to be in the room to make the decision. Just being in sort of part of that decision maker's ecosystem changes the decision making. So that's so we have to be part of every part of this ecosystem. We can't just say, okay, we're going to keep. Also, not enough startups actually go off and ask for funding, female-founded startups. When they actually pitch, they have a higher probability of getting funded. But in most rooms, 1 in 16 actually go in. And hence, 1 in 16, men have 16 times more of the venture funds go into male-founded organizations. So for $60 billion that get funded, there are 12 billion that come to women-founded organizations. So the numbers are overwhelming, scary, but there are spots. So I would free yourself from Silicon Valley-based thinking. Come to New York.
So get into the room, kick down the door, but if something is persistently resistant, sometimes it's another room that you need to find and do your homework. Other questions? Other points? Yes, Shahana.
I'd just like to add to that. I think in South Africa, one of the sort of programs we have is identifying and finding young women or young children in school who are strong in science and technology and nurturing young women to develop those careers and mentoring them.
Questions? A provocation. I mean, we heard a lot about working collaboratively. I loved what Maria ended on there about getting to the place where we're actually creating together. And I'd love to actually throw it out to some of the younger scholars in the room. Like, how does that sound? Actually being in a place to work across generations, to create things, to solve problems. And what are some of the practical steps of being able to do that? What's currently standing in the way? Go for it.
We all know how busy we are, so we think everyone else is busy or triply busy, and so there's a hesitancy to approach. And I think that perhaps the message from this, that where women of all generations express a desire to make and create together and collaborate, would make that a more welcoming environment. So this is the kind of conversation we need to have in order to allow those steps to be taken, I think.
I see I see 3 hands, one in the back, Emily there, and then one in the front. Yeah, maybe go back to front. Yeah.
I'm way too fast, so I'm just gonna start. I'm Anne from Kenya and Ghana, and I think, I think the thing I want to find out from those that have been through this process is, I find it a bit easier these days to gain access. Entry points are a bit available now. But the question is how to stay on with everything else that comes. There's so many winds and waves. There's family, there's adult parents who are getting older and getting sicker. There's so much that's happening after you get in. What is it that has sustained you and kept your momentum going up until there? Because even the higher you go, the stronger the winds can blow you. So how have you sustained yourself when going much, much higher than just getting in?
Any taker or sustaining self? Well, I'd be happy to speak to this one because I think there's two parts of it. One is that sometimes, I think as Karen pointed out, it looks from the outside like you're sustaining and moving up, up, up. But sometimes you've got to like dip or chill or swerve. That there are times in your life where, I've had to step back. I'm now 34 and realizing that I just had a child a couple months ago and I'm in a career which I like, but normally at this point I would say time to push it. What's next, right? Where do I move? But I'm at a job that has great childcare and maternity options. And so for now, this is the right place for me. And this is the right time for me to just chill. And that's been, I think, really big, is to understand that it's important to keep on the pressure in some ways, but it's also very important to recognize that it's okay and in fact good and important to step back at other points in your life. As long as you're aware that there's a longer trajectory. But then to think about, what keeps me inspired and prevents me from starting to slide deeply back into that imposter syndrome of, well, I've been dipping for a while, maybe I can't really soar ever again, is my peer network of a lot of women scholars, but also other friends from Oxford and elsewhere who inspire me by their choices every day. And a lot of times that is about friendship, people you can check in with and who just do amazing things and so believe that you can do amazing things too. Surrounding yourself by people like that who are always reminding you that the kind of crazy idea that you have is totally doable. You should do it, That has been really important for me.
So for me, I think what keeps me going is my passion. So I'm passionate about working on issues of gender-based violence. And so I never ever think about where I want to go. So, I never ever thought I'd be professor. I shouldn't think I'd be in academia at all. It just sort of just happened, honestly. And it was just really that this issue is important to me, that, I want to end violence against women. And so this drives me in terms of everything that I do. The other thing is traveling. I got to make sure there's a new destination somewhere along the line. So I'm going to Brazil next week.
And I'd encourage you to find other words than momentum, because I think there is a thing about momentum which suggests constant movement, constant speed, and I think that's impossible. So I took 5 years where I had my own consulting practice and would basically do what I wanted to do, and clients I wanted to work with, partly because the kids were at that stage where I wanted them to know who they were and get to the right point. Right after, I went off and joined and became a strategy lead, which means I have much less time. But these are, and I never make promises about what the next 5 years looks like, because I know that I'll have to make the right choice for every part of my life. So I think if you give yourself, you're kind enough to yourself to think differently than the word momentum. I think that's the key. And you should, you travel, and I write, and I took the 5 years and in between to also sort of say one of the things that I will do. I set a target was to write a book, and I wrote a book about how to sort of drive innovation in your own self. And so if you can push yourself to think differently than what the world is telling you should be doing, I think is the key. You don't have to fit other people's view of who you should be, right? So.
Finding your path. There was another question there.
Hi, my name is Emmy, and I'm one of the current scholars, so I see Nadiya looking at me like I'm here trying to hear from the current scholars. So I'll take the charge on that one. I just wanted to say thank you, because I think Nadiya hinted sometimes there's an intimidation or a barrier to sort of talking with the older scholars. And this panel, I think it's it's nice to have conversations that are about passion and about journeys, and not just, you know, it's intimidating to read bios and to see positions and people's, like, this is all my accomplishments. And I think this panel has been much more about sort of why you do what you do and how you got there, and that honest conversation makes me less afraid to, like, approach you guys or to have that kind of interaction. So along those kind of same lines, I just wanted to ask about maybe people in your lives, role models have been mentioned, peers, maybe their partners. Who are the people who, at least in part, are responsible for some of the things you've achieved, and who have those people been, and how have you found them and supported each other? Because I know for myself, at least, I definitely stand on the shoulders of giants and have women, largely women, who have supported me to date and are largely responsible for where I am today. So thank you.
Role models are people who've been there for you, who've inspired you.
I mean, I find, I don't know that it's role models versus people who just step up at those important points in your life when you need that next directional or supportive sort of hand. And in my case, I'd say it's 60-40, 60% are men who have sort of said, you know, I've got this role, it's an unconventional role, it's a risky role, but I want you to join. This was one of my first bosses. But two of my first bosses did exactly that. They said, no way to define it and then do it. And so I think that sort of degree of freedom was what I needed in order to be able to succeed. I think, you know, there are people who I've learned from who didn't set out to actually be helpful. You know, one of a senior woman that I worked for, and I learned how to be a strong female in a corporation from her, but I would never be her, and I am not the boss that she was. So that's helpful.
Denise.
Well, I would repeat some of what Roopa just said, and I would also just say that the advice I always give young people when they're starting a career is, and obviously you're not just learning from your workplaces and role models in your workplaces, but you have to be careful about knowing exactly what you want to do and how you're going to do it, because what's so important is who you're going to be working with and who you're going to be working for. And I would just urge you to think really carefully about the people who are going to be in your work community when you join an organization. I went to School of Management where organizational behavior was really critical to what they were trying to teach us. So not economics and finance so much, but organizational behavior. And one of the mantras there was, it's all there at entry. And so you have to pay attention to the people you're interviewing with and interacting with, because if they seem off, if they seem like they're not the kind of people who can help you, they're not going to treat other people well, they're not going to change. So just be attentive to that. And yes, you can learn from the negatives as well as from the positives, but I would just be watchful and go forward.
Can I? Maybe just certainly to echo the sort of the choosing your colleagues with care. And I think it's kind of old-fashioned, but do their moral values match yours? Is there something there which you feel you can work with? But I think, and maybe coming back to the earlier question, and going to life in general beyond the sort of the work piece, horrible things are going to happen, and there are going to be periods where stuff is not just holding still; it's going down. And I think something from me that was hard with that is having put so much effort into being independent and being able to take care of myself, the willingness to rely on the kindness of friends, and the willingness to accept I'm not going to be perfect and hold it all together, that was really hard for me to do. But I think the beauty and the delight of friends who are there for you in that, and the willingness to draw on that, I think maybe for many of us is quite hard learned. But it's, well, to take one of Karen's words, it's miraculous.
Yeah, I want to add on for Penelope's point, that for me, my female friends in particular, in times of personal crisis, work crisis, emotional, spiritual growth development, were the strength of my support and lifeline, really. So, I don't think I'd be anywhere where I am without my female friends and a few male friends too.
I'll just quickly add, of course, my friends have been so important, but for people who are thinking about having partners, one of the things that I really took away from the 30-year anniversary was something Nara Woods said, was just about how important it is to choose wisely.
Which means a woman does some choosing.
At this very moment, my wonderful partner is circling Oxford with my 3-month-old to keep her asleep. And, it is hard work to have an equal partnership. That is some of the hardest work I've done in my life and the most worthwhile work in my life. So that's, I think, something that's so worth thinking about. It may feel like it puts you in a holding pattern because of the work it takes to do, if that's something that you want to do or that you have the opportunity to do. But I think, for me, that has been such a support to have a partner who sees my career as at least as important as his own, and to see our family as at least as much his responsibility as mine. So that's been invaluable.
Thank you. There's a hand there, and then I think there are two there.
Hi, so I'm Helen Raynham. I'm a South African at-large scholar from 1991, and I'm living now in Boston. So I'm a physician, and I'm a businesswoman. And I just wanted to follow up on a little discussion we had earlier on about collaboration and about networking. And I remember I was a medical resident in the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. And I'm just a natural networker. I like to talk. That's the way I get ahead in life. And there were a group of men who were residents, and there happened to be a few men, who always used to play basketball on Wednesday nights. And I thought, well, this is great because maybe they also played with their professors. So here they were doing their networking with the professors, basketball, Wednesday night. So I thought, well, I'd love to come along. And so I said, can I please come along? No, it's just for men. So that was the first time. And then I remember I didn't know anything about football. I always grew up with rugby. And they had this thing called the Super Bowl. I don't know if any of you know. Super Bowl. And I know you might also have heard about the World Series between two American teams. Makes a lot of sense, right? The World Series. Anyway, so there was this Super Bowl. So, and there were some guys who were organizing it. And I said, well, can I please come along? It sounds great. I thought, it's a nice time to meet some people. Nope, it's only for the guys. And that was in about 1994. And then also I have another story. So I went to medical school in South Africa. And a lot of the guys and the residents would get together on Wednesdays and go play golf. And of course, I think that what I remember, it's a long time ago, you could only go on the golf course on Wednesdays if you're a guy. So I couldn't go along. So now it comes back to collaboration. Now there's the old folks like me who don't know too much about social media, but they're the youngsters like many of you at Rhodes House, who are at Oxford right now, who know a lot more than I know about social media. The tweeting, one of you guys mentioned. I don't even know how to tweet, and I'd like somebody to teach me how to tweet later on.
It's an on-conference segment.
I need to learn how to tweet. Then there's also, I know Facebook, that's good. I know I'm good at Facebook. Instagram, I'm listed as an Instagram person, but I don't do it, but at least it's on there. People try and follow me, and they're meant to be following them. I don't know what that's all about, but I've got it on, it's one of my little badges. But anyway, I had an idea because, even if I did have time and even if I was invited to go play golf, who has time to play golf? It's a long, long game. We all working,
The men have time to play golf.
Right? So, I've got my 4 kids, I've got my business, I've got seeing my patients. Who has time? So what I'd like to suggest, and this is where our junior group can really help us, is let's think about creating a forum, something on social media. Maybe call it the golf course, because we were never really allowed to go to the golf course, or something. Give it a really nice, hip name, and let's somehow all get together and use this social media, because of course you can do social media when you're cooking or watching over the kids. You can do it, right? Because the way in which we can all get ahead is by thinking outside the box and being creative. So let's think about creating some kind of social media forum that's going to work. And you've got to teach the old people like me how to use it. And then let's use that somehow to work together and to collaborate. Right?
Helen, thank you. And there is an unconference session, so literally you can get going on that. And 2 quick little snippets on life currently at Rhodes House. At the Rhodes Ball this year, I did my first Snapchat, and someone's laughing at the back. And I thought I was hip because I knew about Facebook, I knew about Twitter, but I didn't know about Snapchat. I've learned. And just last week, a male scholar approached me saying, look, we're going to start a football team. Fantastic. It's like the cricket team, we want to be both genders. And then, apparently in the research, they were told by the council that adjudicates over inter-college football that, oh no, only boys. And so they're planning a subversion as to how it is that they're going to get beyond the only boys on the Rhodes football team to compete. So we're moving in the right direction. But there are 2 hands in the back that we want to hear from.
Hi, Mutsa, Zimbabwe 2010. First of all, Karen Stevenson, if your ears have been ringing, it's because I talk about you all the time, as if you're like my lifelong friend. So let's have a chat, because you are my hero. The second thing is that you guys have been talking a lot about your support from your female friends. But my reality is that I work with only males, and I will continue to work with only males. I'm going into a new job where the founding partner is only guys. We're going to be only working with guys. So my question is, how have you used men? Okay, Queen's English. What are you taking away from your experience or role models with men that you would give advice for a reality that we're going to go into male-dominated fields?
Critical. Who wants to jump on that?
I mean, I wanted to just sort of reflect on, they're both connected, but there will be basketball games and you don't feel like playing. I would use, if you have, use a proxy. I use my husband as my strategic missile whenever I have to, because I like tennis, but you know, I've gone to football games and I spend the time talking about business because my husband's taking care of the football. So I would sort of use it. But I think to your point, one of the things I did learn in Oxford was to drink. So, you know.
We said truthful stories and truth-telling.
Too much that, you know, and I don't want the warden to hear this. But anyway, some of that stipend was well put to use. But it's all kidding aside. I think there are going to be times when you're going to say, you know what? If going out for a drink and just sort of ensure that you have a buddy who's going to make sure you don't get too drunk. But I think the key is there are times when you're going to just have to go in and play the game. I mean, when I do in my work, you know, you're writing strategy documents, and sometimes I'm sitting there thinking the core is 3 sentences I have on page 1, but you have to write that 80-page document to get the credibility to then say, in reality, these are the 2 things we need to do. And I feel like there's a lot of life where sometimes you just have to just say, okay, I see this, I play this, and now I raise you too, right? I think that's the piece that's more concrete, I would say.
Thank you, Roopa. Others on working in male-dominated fields or just working with male colleagues and male friends, yeah?
I like to add, so I don't drink and I refuse to. I don't do sport, but I do think you find alliances with men who are supportive around the issues that you need support around. So they always are, and I mean, I think even in the field of gender-based violence right now, we're looking a lot of working with men to support, how do they support no violence against women, or whatever the case might be. So it's about finding those allies that are going to help push you up. I'll just share a personal experience. I was being stalked. And when I was being stalked, and I work in the field of gender-based violence, I actually didn't go to my female friends. I went to my male friends on how do I work with this? How do I deal with this situation? So they are finding the right kind of allies without necessarily changing your value system. Because I don't really think that we should have to change our value system to play any game. So, yeah.
Penelope?
I think men are a wee bit heterogeneous. I think, just like we are. And I've certainly I've had the kind of male colleague who writes the "she's a nice girl, but" comment. And I've had the boss of that male colleague who said to me, okay, how are we going to deal with this situation so that you can be empowered to do the work that you need to do, and I can help you manage the colleague, I can help you work with that. One of the most helpful pieces of managerial support I got was from a male boss who, when I went sort of saying, I think you're about to discover that I don't know what I'm doing here, said to me, you've got to realize we're all skating on thin ice. It's just fine. So I think coming back to the earlier point of picking the people you work with as much care as you can. And I mean, I guess this may sound simplistic, but I've had both wonderful support and some pretty needed kicks in the pants as well from male colleagues who've seen me being less than I could be. So I try and pick my male colleagues with as much care as I pick my female ones.
Not simplistic at all, not to essentialize men. There was a burning one in the back. It's our last question. I wonder if could I cheat and take two at once? Yes? So these last two, because those hands have been up. And
thank you. So thank you so much for doing this. So one comment I wanted to make, and this follows up on what Penelope was just saying. My name is Kathy Sandoval from California and St. Anthony's. With respect to those who at times feel like imposters or have been told to feel like imposters, I want to just suggest with respect that we think of that as something that others actually impose on us. And this is certainly something that I've seen in my professional life as well as my academic life. I'm a law professor. I was a commissioner of the California Public Utilities Commission for 6 years, constitutional officer of the state of California, the first Latina ever to be a CPUC commissioner. It's 100-year history. And I tell you this because following me, we also had Commissioner Carlo Peterman, also a Rhodes Scholar. And then subsequently, when there was an opening and they were appointing a new president, the man who they appointed president, who subsequently, after much work, became my friend, was named Michael. This is relevant to the story because the two other men on the commission were also named Michael. Now, all of the Michaels had substantially less education and experience than Carla and I did. And so when the Michael got appointed, he was sitting right next to me, and before our first meeting started, he said, so, to be on this commission, you just need to be named Michael. And I said, or be a Rhodes Scholar. And then he said, oh yeah. But I mean, the point is that like the qualifications for the women were so much higher. And yet it didn't stop Michael from being the man, right? I have never seen a man who confesses to an imposter syndrome. And in fact, one of my male friends who had been on the commission with me the first couple of years, he said one time when one of the other guys tried to push him around and the other guy said to him, who do you think you are? He said, I am a vote and someday you will need me. So, just with respect, let's like embrace our voice and our role, and we belong. And, we don't have to adopt when men tell us that we are imposters, it's like Janet Jackson said, it's all about control, and we're in control.
She quoted Janet Jackson. Thank you. Thank you. Who's now touring at over 50, right? That hand that's been up for a while, yeah? And this is our last one, but there's plenty of opportunity to continue the conversation.
Hi, my name's Hannah. I'm an Australian scholar, was here in 2005. So I was here for the 30th anniversary with Maria. It seems just like yesterday. Just have a couple of comments from the last, from two of the questions. First, on the point about working in male-dominated fields. I work with the UN, and when we recruit, we do competency-based interviews. Just a very quick anecdote. Last year, I was doing a round of competency-based interviews. One of the questions we asked a male candidate was, can you tell us about a time when you've had trouble working in a team? And the response was, oh yes, there was this one time when I had to work in a team that was all women. full stop. And the panel was quite stunned. We said, could you tell us exactly what the problem was? Could you elaborate? He said, yes, well, they were all women. There were no men on the team. In all seriousness. So it just made me reflect. We've come so far, but we still have a long way to go. And just quickly, I wanted to pick up, it follows on from Helen's point before about the use of social media. One thing that Karen said this morning really struck me. She said in 1979 when she started, I wish we had a hotline across generations when we could call, we could have called each other. When I started in 2005, we certainly didn't have that. I think today in 2017, things are better. We've tried to establish some mentor programs and all these kind of things. But one thing perhaps we could all reflect on over the course of the weekend is how can we establish this hotline? I certainly wish I'd had that in 2005, a hotline to all of you women. Maybe even now it would be useful for me. It would be useful for people who've recently left Oxford. How can we establish this in practice? So maybe that's something we can all think about in the next few days.
I actually think that's a perfect note to end on, a really concrete action that resonates with everything that we've been saying. And the only thing I could add, I feel, is a word that we haven't said as yet, which is fearlessness. I think there's actually been a lot of things that have touched on embodying that fearlessness. And if it's a matter of be fearless in claiming power in personal spaces in a way that feel tricky and hard because that's closest to home, or be fearless in the way you put down new laws, new rules in your institutions that you happen to have power within, or be fearless in how you reach out across generations to continue to do the good work, and maybe also in stepping back to take that chill time, across the board. And of course, being fearless in creating your own script and your own path. But that's the end of our opening plenary, and I will invite Ashley Orr to set us up for the next sessions in parallel. And most of all, I will thank the panelists who we asked to be brave and to step into the vulnerability first. And I believe they did that. So thank you.